All right, Sam Hiner, welcome to the show.
Thank you
Uh,
for having me.
yeah, I'm happy to have you here. Sam, much like me, you also started an organization for social change while still in high school. So, can you tell me what the Young People's Alliance is and why you started it?
For sure. The Young People's Alliance is an organization that's dedicated to empowering young people through advocacy and organizing. And I started it because my friend and I, when we were in high school, got really into pro-democracy legislation. And so we started going to the state legislature and advocating for different things that we wanted to see happen. But we noticed that as young people, while we could legislators or politicians might want to take a picture with us and show how they were talking to young people and encouraging the next generation, or even offer us internships. When it actually came to listening to our perspectives on policy matters, there was a
Mhm.
lot less energy there. So
Mm.
we saw that in order for young people's voices on issues we care about to be heard, we needed an organization that could effectively advocate and speak for young people on the issues that are affecting us.
Interesting. Okay, so how did you like specifically experience this lack of energy regarding your actual feelings and opinions on, policy and policy making in politics as a young person? Like, how did you feel excluded from that?
I mean, it's something that's you can still see every day. So when we do our advocacy work with the Young People's Alliance, if I go email a staffer or try to get a meeting and I say, "Oh, I'm a student here," very unlikely that I will get in the door. Or maybe there will be that photo opportunity like I was talking about, or I'll get referred to the internships coordinator, but unlikely that I'll be meeting with anybody who can substantively impact policy. However, once we get into those rooms and we're able to show that we actually know what we're talking about, we understand these policy issues. Funnily enough, having graduated college and gotten this advanced education, that a lot of your staffers have isn't something that makes them able to understand these policy issues in a way we can't. Young people can still understand these issues.
Mm.
Once we show that, we get a lot more energy from those offices and we can build long-term relationships. But it's always that early part of getting in the room where you have to overcome a lot of initial I wouldn't I'm not sure what the right term is, maybe like derisiveness where people just don't take you seriously
Yeah,
because you're a young person.
interesting. So, like, I personally haven't attempted to, get in contact with policymakers. And in your experience with now contacting policymakers and contacting people in your local government or national government even, have you seen a difference since you've started this organization? So now you can introduce yourself as not just, hey, I'm a college student, but hey, I founded this organization all about young people, becoming involved in politics. Has that like showing of extreme levels of proactive initiative, have you seen a change in response since then?
Oh, for sure. I mean, when I email people in the state legislature, I'll usually say I'm a student. But when I email people in Congress, I just say I'm the executive director. I don't mention that I'm a student. And then, just kind of showing that in the email, I know what I'm talking about. That's been pretty successful. And like I said, the long-term relationships are key too. So we have a full-time person in DC who's 23 years old, and she's done a great job over the last year of building up a lot of relationships to the point now where we have a lot of people who trust and respect us in those offices without having to start from square one.
That's so awesome. It's really cool to see you having made all this progress, being someone who started this organization in high school and now you are a junior in college, correct?
That's right. I'm a junior at UNC Chapel Hill now.
Okay, so we're right around the same age. I mean, I'm 21. You're 21 too, right?
Yep, just turned 21.
So yeah, well, happy late birthday. Well, it's cool to see you making all this progress, and it's quite a feat to be, having accomplished all these things at such a young age. So you operate on so many campuses. How many campuses are you operating on now?
We're at 11 university campuses throughout North Carolina and then one high school campus that we just opened up.
That is so cool. So you have this extensive organization with these extensive student director board, campus directors, and like tell me more about your organization. What is it like being a 21-year-old running an 11 campus new high school campus organization? What's that like?
I mean, I've really got to give it credit to our organizing director, Alex, who's the guy who day to day is meeting with all of those field directors, coordinating all those operations. He's amazing. And I mean, that's the biggest thing from like being a student trying to start this organization is I remember early on, my co-founder and I, it was us, and then we recruited like 10 to 20 of our friends to help us launch this organization. And, a lot of that early work fell on us. Like we would be the people up at night sending these emails when the legislators didn't respond for a month, doing all these follow-ups,
Mhm.
continuing to push and call until we could finally get those first meetings. Um, but over the last 4 years almost at this point, we've been able to find a couple really, really talented people who've been able to fill some key roles for the organization. And that's the sole thing that's enabled us to have the impact that we have today. That it's not just me and my co-founder anymore, but we have a bunch of really smart people working for the organization who are incredibly hardworking and keeping us doing what we're doing.
Well, that is really good to hear that you've been able to utilize the tools of delegation and leadership because, in order to make a grander impact, of course, you can't do it all yourself. So that's really cool to hear that you've established this amazing organization with such cool people and capable people.
Thank
So
you.
I think that there's a lot of college students out there, and maybe just young adults, that might be struggling to find the motivation that they need to maybe get up earlier, stay up later, work harder to make a difference in the world. And so, would you have any advice for these young adults and college students, maybe even high school students, starting out in life, wanting to make a difference?
That's a really good question. I really like that prompt. Um, I mean, it's difficult because like I do everything that I do now and it is a lot of work, but at the same time I was that kid as well who, had these dreams of what I wanted to do and how the world could be better. But when it came to action, procrastination, all these things are still very real. And for me, I think the biggest thing was finding something that I genuinely enjoyed. I feel like a lot of our discourse around like what should you do for a career, what should you do with your time has been don't do what you're passionate about, do what will make you comfortable, and then do your passions as a hobby. And I mean, my personal experience is different from that. Maybe this won't
Mhm.
apply to everyone, but I found that I could, go be a consultant and hate it and not do a very good job, or I could do this advocacy work and actually want to get out of the bed in the morning and send these emails and feel like, for me, what keeps me motivated on a day to day is also like all these emails I'm sending, everything I'm doing feels important and it feels like something that needs to be addressed. So even if I was feeling bad one day, I'd like, yeah, I have to get back to this email because we've got to get this bill passed or whatever it is. But anyways, that deeper drive makes me a lot better at advocacy than I would be at consulting or something else. So I found that I'm able to have a lot more impact by doing something that I really love and care about.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. I totally agree. I got bit by my like desire and passion that drives me day to day, when I, started working on Reconnect and feeling like I could make a difference in my generation with, our ability to make connections without our phones and things like that. And I totally agree. You just got to find that thing that actually you care about. So when you were starting this, what were the issues, the things that you saw in your state legislature, in our government in general? What were those things that really like grabbed your attention? You just couldn't sit idly by and watch happen. Like what grabbed your attention initially to want to create this alliance?
Yeah, so we did after we initially founded and worked on some pro-democracy issues, we did voter mobilization for a long time, those 11 campuses that you were talking about. But then just last year, we started expanding to work on youth and social media. And my personal experience with social media has been interesting. Like I've had these phases where I get super, super drawn in and addicted to it, have to delete all the apps, and then have that fear of missing out and re-download them. And I genuinely think that they're an important part of youth culture. But at the same time, they are intentionally designed to be as addictive as possible, to keep you online for as long as possible, and to send you to the extreme content that will make you feel angry and insecure, which are emotions that will keep you scrolling. So, seeing that, I felt like something had to be done. But my experience is fairly milquetoast, even compared to what I heard from a lot of my peers. I had friends who would tell me about going on social media, getting social media at maybe 12 to 14 years old, and seeing posts about healthy eating, and either liking those posts or hovering over them for a second longer than they would a normal post. Next thing they know, their content gets more and more extreme. A dieting post that's 10% more extreme than the last one that they saw. And it gets more extreme until they're seeing posts that are saying in an entire day you should eat an orange, 8 almonds, and a coffee, and that's it. And coupled with Photoshop pictures of models, all of which, makes them feel like they don't look the way they should look, and distorts their worldview because they're spending all of this time scrolling on social media. But the reason that that works for social media companies is because it keeps them online. So social media companies are going to promote awful things like that. You've got a similar pipeline with political extremism, where people will see more and more extreme content that fits their biases. And because they're on social media, it keeps getting more extreme over time, and it distorts their worldview. So, with those two things in mind, and just seeing how person after person I talked to had those same experiences, it got to the point where I felt like every deep conversation I had with somebody, we would get back to social media being at the root of some major issue like that in their life. I felt like something had to be done, and so we started working on those issues at the state level.
Yeah, that is definitely something that I've heard of happening and has happened to me. I mean, I used to get these, like, maybe I was interested in self-improvement, and then, next post is a little bit more extreme, and next thing you know, you're listening to some crazy, like, guy telling you need to be rich and retire your parents by the time you're 18, or you're a total failure. And it's like, it's just like really, really extreme, unhealthy forms of content that get pushed towards you, and you don't even know that it's happening. It's happening by an algorithm you're not even watching. So
Yeah.
it really can be harmful on a personal level, and on, an emotional level, especially for young people. And how do you see this affecting the political environment of like how young people can interact with politics if this is their experience with it through social media?
It's really bad. I mean, on the one hand, social media's promise was going to be incredible. We were finally taking media out of the hands of an establishment that decided what goes on TV. And instead, anybody could post anything, and whatever more people liked would get promoted. However, instead of being a democracy online, we've just accepted a dictatorship of the algorithm, where social media companies can decide what kinds of content they want to promote, with the sole goal being not fulfilling you, not informing you, not educating you, not making you a better person, but just keeping you online for as long as possible. Um, so that's, I think, why online discourse isn't what we want it to be in terms of what we're specifically seeing. Obviously, we had cancel culture for a while, which I think, whatever your party affiliation, we can all agree that that's not really an effective way of doing politics. It doesn't uh, lend itself to people wanting to have productive political conversations where minds can be changed and we can actually move forward as a society. So I think that's one thing worth noting. I think we've also got to note the extremist pipelines. There's been conversations in the past about the YouTube alt-right pipeline, and that's been replicated elsewhere. I'll just generally actually expand this out to comment on the experience of a lot of young men on social media. Andrew Tate got a lot of attention. And I think there's a lot of content, like you were talking about, that is in name supposed to be self-improvement. But in reality, what it does is it uses a lot of anger about society and the way it is, and maybe anger towards women and us not living in traditional society, so that the young men watching this content feel like oh, this is just self-improvement. I'm just doing this so, I can get the motivation to start going to the gym or whatever. But in reality, what's keeping them watching that is feeling better about themselves by putting down women or whatever group is
Mhm.
being videos. I think it's a really interesting trend that I've seen a lot of, like those, you know, pro men or maybe slightly more conservative personalities on the media do, which I think we need to pay attention to. We need to pay attention to how our content creators and algorithms trying to subtly impact our minds and maybe not focus, maybe we're not so focused on the discourse all the time. We're not focused on the actual logical argument, but it's that kind of emotional underpinning that keeps us
Mhm.
engaged. And I don't know if that answers your question, but those are just some things I've noticed and happy to go into more detail.
Yeah, yeah, no, I love that perspective. I've never even thought about it in that way where you described it as, social media was this promise of, oh, we're taking it out of the hands of these big companies. Anybody can post whatever they want, and whatever gets the most likes, is what we see. But it's actually this dictatorship where it's just this algorithm designed to keep us doing and watching whatever the big company wants us to do. And we've discovered even more powers, like you're saying, of subtly utilizing an emotional response to get someone to watch or feel a certain way or, have a certain thought about this type of person. Like, for example, a woman, if you're using, some kind of underlying anger from society and pointing that at something, all with the goal of just keeping someone on the app seems so evil and innately ineffective for creating an operating society. So that whole concept of the dictatorship is intriguing to me. Can you like kind of elaborate on that idea of the dictatorship versus a democratic social media and what those algorithms look like, vice versa?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really difficult. And I think as a society, we need to take like a leap in terms of how we think about autonomy, really, how we think about us controlling our own experiences. Because social media is just absolute proof that it's not enough to just say, all right, go do whatever you want, go wild. But we need to have some additional protections in place to ensure that our what we want is, let me think about how to say this. Um, to ensure that our actions are aligned with what we want them to be, I guess is the best way to put it. For example, like a drug addict who really wants more drugs right now. We don't say, okay, well, this person wants more drugs, so that must be in their best interest. We say that's, a short term, like emotional response to how they're feeling right now. But long term, in terms of what they actually want for their life, it would probably be to not be a drug addict.
Right.
And the same goes with social media, right? Like, even though I might hover over this post for a second longer, that doesn't mean that I want more of it in my life. That just means that maybe it has some morbid fascination. Maybe I can't understand the post and I'm hovering over it for a second longer. But it's usually an entirely subconscious process, and we shouldn't allow those processes where, anger and insecurity are the most powerful emotion often to dominate um what we truly care about and what we consciously want for ourselves in our lives. So we need to make sure that we're having design features that rather than playing off of your subconscious mindset, is empowering you first. So where it's asking you, what kind of content do you want to see? Where search plays a great role. And I'll say this, for as bad as TikTok is, what I love about TikTok over other platforms is the search feature is so much better. And that's a big step for user autonomy, right? They can find what they want, they can control their experiences. And I think other apps should move the same way, rely more on search and tags rather than just relying on trying to break into your user's brain and use that to understand what content will keep them online the longest.
Wow, that was an extremely well put statement regarding the ways that these algorithms are in charge of our media. Like, it's so true how, you know, how could these apps just be using our subconscious, 1 second in between what we look at, by a subconscious emotional response from anger or fear or like, like you said, even a morbid curiosity or just a misunderstanding. Like, how are those the things that are powering what the entire world sees in the media? That's just so broken. And like you're saying, like you're pushing for a more healthy algorithmic relationship between the user and the media app, whatever it might be. What specifically are you hoping? Because you're quite the visionary with how you're viewing the algorithms, and I really love to see these because I haven't even thought about algorithms in this way. I love to see that you're seeing it and that you're pushing for this type of stuff. So how do you see algorithms how do you see it being possible for algorithms to move in a more positive direction? And how are you planning on, making sure that happens through the legislature and government?
Yeah, so our big priority right now is the Kids Online Safety Act and the provision about that. That's a big bill that does a lot of things. But the provision in that bill that we're the most excited about is around algorithms and saying that you need to be able to opt out of these algorithms that make content recommendations. We have a similar bill at the state level, which we actually wrote at the Young People's Alliance, and that functions a little bit differently. It says that user related data cannot be used in those algorithms, which means that they basically just have to rely on what's popular right now, and things like that rather than personal data in terms of making those algorithm choices. But something like that, I think, would go a long way if you were just able to turn off algorithms, and specifically for minors, if they were turned off by default, because I think our minors, while I'm all for youth power, I think a lot of times minors don't understand those full risks yet. And so not allowing them to, or not allowing them, but not defaulting it on for them without even disclosing what might happen to them in terms of those eating disorders, political extremism, isolation, anxiety, depression, I think is a really bad idea. So it should be defaulted off for minors, which we're working on getting in COSA right now. But even having that opt-out option, I think is really important so that your feed can be more based on what are you actually looking for rather than what does an algorithm think you want. And then there's a lot of other things in that bill, which are really good as well, like certain ensuring that the most private and safe settings are on by default for minors. And then another big thing in that bill would be to establish a duty of care, which would generally say that these social media companies have an obligation to protect you online.
That sounds fantastic. I would love to see some of those things happen. Are there any examples of this being done in a state, or like these new algorithms, opt out, opt in? Have those been applied anywhere in the country yet?
No, not yet. We've seen some movement on social media legislation. I don't think anything has really gone into effect yet, because the big bill in California, that was the design code bill, which included those design defaults that are also in the Kids Online Safety Act, is currently going through legal challenges. And then there's a lot of other stuff that's come out that's just waiting to go into effect, basically, and also is getting sued by Meta, who has a lot of money that they're spending on lawyers.
So the people who are trying to pass the bill are currently getting sued by Meta.
Yeah. Or who have already, in states where the bill's already passed, Meta is suing and saying that the bills are unconstitutional.
Whoa, and they've got endless pockets, so that's a tough situation to fight.
Yeah,
Well,
and actually, in when we first introduced our bill in North Carolina, I'm, a student right now, and I was just driving to the legislature, skipping a ton of class to be there, and we got this bill introduced after months of me doing that. The day after we get it introduced, Meta's head of global safety flies down to North Carolina from California, to come talk to legislators about why this bill is bad. So that just shows you the just scale and reach that they have, where they can be anywhere in the world in a day to push for the legislation that they want and ensure that proposals they don't like are opposed. But we're still making progress on that, so I'm optimistic.
wow, that's crazy that they even heard about your act and were following it, and then were able to go in and oppose it. But what
Oh, and
ended
they
up
didn't
happening
they
there?
didn't know, by the way. I knew that Meta was like that. So initially the way that we approached it was trying to just keep it between the people who needed to know about it until we got it on the floor, and then we were gonna have broader discussions then. And even then, they within a day they found out about it and were in North Carolina.
Whoa. So how, like, what ended up happening when you brought the bill to the floor? You started having the discussions, and that Meta person came in. Were they able to sway the room?
So I actually was in a meeting with their team, and I think, I mean, you can tell that their arguments are not based, like for me, when I'm going there, my arguments are based in my experiences, the experiences of my peers, and just the genuine, like, impulse that what's going on now is really bad, backed by all of the data that I've seen that this is really bad. So there's a lot of values and meaning behind what I'm talking about when I'm saying these things. When it comes to the meta people, that's clearly not the case, right? What you'll see is a lot of argument shifting where people will start with like just say every argument that they can possibly think of that might be convincing to try to make their case, and other tactics like that. I mean, the main point I want to emphasize there is like, I'm not making comments on like these people specifically, but you can tell that there's just less of a genuine like desire, like need for change in the same way that there is for young people. Like this matters a lot more to us than it does to them, I guess is the way I would put it.
Right. So they can kind of just be robotic about it and just throw as many arguments your way as possible that might be appealing in a certain way, form of logic, but at the end of the day, they're just coming from more of like a anti just basically we don't want to hear this. We don't want to see this past kind of perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and they what another thing that they'll do is say like, "Oh, this would destroy social media as we know it." And they actually released a press release about our bill that was not at all specific to the provisions in our bill. It was a press release that was clearly just copied and pasted from another bill, and then our name was put on it, saying this will destroy social media because they weren't even reading these bills. They were just like, any regulation is bad, and we need to get out in front of it. So just again showing that there's not a lot of legitimate consideration and desire to say how can we make these platforms best for young people. It's more so about protecting share price, unfortunately for them.
Yeah, I honestly, when you're describing the what would happen if these bills were passed, that being able to opt out of algorithms and algorithms just being unavailable to minors and such things, I honestly, it makes me think like, what would social media even become? What would be left of social media if these algorithms didn't run it? And do you have any idea on what you're asking them to do, or from a technology standpoint, how would social media operate if there was no algorithm?
Yeah, I have a very bright vision for what social media could be. Um, and one, it would be my friends who have suffered from eating disorders due to social media would be able to actually come back on these apps because once that happens to you, it never really leaves you. And a lot of these people can't be on social media anymore, can't connect with their friends. And so that's, I think, number one, the most important thing is to stop social media from being a place where apps that want to destroy you essentially to
Yeah.
keep you online for as long as possible, have a monopoly on these apps. Um, Other than that, I think in terms of what the experience is like, it should be if algorithms aren't driving everything, then it should be driven by the person. So, like I was saying, searching for tags should become a much bigger part of how social media works. Like hashtags can be a part of that. With AI, tagging content is becoming a lot bigger.
Mhm.
TikTok searches we already know is huge. But yeah, if I want to see puppy related content, it no longer is about how long I spend watching puppy videos. I can just follow the puppy's hashtag and it's the same thing. Those
Oh.
are features that are a lot more centered in what users are actively choosing to see rather than saying this is what a user is looking at, whether they actually are enjoying that experience or not.
Right. So it's a conscious, you're clicking, okay, I want to see the self-improvement hashtag, and it's not going to start sending you somewhere you don't want to be. Like it'll be, well, I'm not sure how that would look, but I do like the idea of being able to click the tags of what you want to see rather than it being done for you based on things you don't even know are happening because you're scrolling a certain type of way on their app.
Yeah. And another thing, just worth noting that I like with that is on TikTok now, they have where the top few comments will have links in them where keywords will be picked out. And you can click on those keywords to see more like that video. I think that's another example of something that is more driven by the user rather than being like, oh, you watched this video, so we're just going to straight up recommend you the next one. Like, let's get more of those features in there. And to be fair, there still may be a role of like, I know like people all the time are talking about train crash videos being on TikTok. That personally hasn't been on my feed as much, but I know it's a common thing that people talk about now that represents as well. You see one and then you click on a link to see another just because of your short-term morbid curiosity. It doesn't represent what you want to be seeing in a month, but yet it still influences your algorithm. Um, so that may still be an issue there, but generally I think users leading that process is a lot better.
Right, right. And I'm sure it's really it's not about it being perfect on the first go. I think somehow there needs to be a way for these companies to have to start the process of building it in a new way that's not literally breeding destruction, on anyone who uses it. Because, maybe they start doing it by a user controlled hashtag experience as far as algorithm wise, and then they discover a problem here, and then okay, you work towards that. But going towards a new goal is, I feel like, what needs to happen in order for social media to become more literally inhabitable, like you're saying, for people that to be able to use it you know
Yeah, I love that word, habitable, as well to describe it, because that really is what it's like.
Yeah, it's just it's not inhabitable for certain people, especially people that have had bad experiences. I mean, me personally, I have Instagram completely blocked from all my devices, and I gave my brother a password that I was like, "Don't tell me." Like, I just have taken it off of everything because it's just not. I know it's not good for me. And so bringing it a little bit back to, political change and, in-person things that people can do, we see a lot of people that get bitten by a problem that they really care about, whether it's climate change or preserving nature and parks and or anything really, and they might voice their political concerns over social media. So when a young person becomes aware of an issue that they care about, how can they take real world action where they can make a difference? Because I think a lot of people just don't know what to do, so they just post on social media. It doesn't make as much of a difference. So how can they do that in the real world?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, social media activism, I know a lot of people will say it's all BS. I think there's some value to it,
Mhm.
especially in terms of changing societal norms and culture. That can happen way faster on social media. Like, look at Blackout Tuesday from Black Lives Matter. That gets made fun of a lot. But I think it had a really big impact in terms of that was the when those issues, I wouldn't say went mainstream, but supporting them went mainstream. Like it went from, at least in our generation, I feel like it went from being controversial to being like, oh yeah, like people side with Black Lives Matter. And I don't know if you have like a similar experience with that. That was my experience in North Carolina.
Yeah, I think it was probably because it was so pushed, on social media. All you saw for like 3, 4 longer, like so many months, was just, Blackout Tuesday, like pictures of protests, like all these concepts being pushed on us. And I think we were all immediately faced with that. And for me, it was like, oh wow, like this is what we're doing. I'm happy to see the country on the same page. And I think I just joined that movement without even really thinking about it, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think that was, shows the power that social media has in terms of like it can shift people's views very quickly or shift people's at least expectations of what their views are. And there's, however, that said, there are issues where people may not actually share those views. Like I see this a lot with DEI, where like people don't really understand what it is, but they support it because that's, what the expectation is from online culture. And I mean, personally, I think there's a lot of value to DEI programs, but I think that the discourse around it, there's the reason that they're getting torn apart across the country right now is because the discourse around DEI is so uninformed because nobody's bothered to actually learn what it is. They've just either taken a support or opposed position. And I think that's made it easier for the people who oppose it to say, oh, it's about quotas and it's about rewriting history and all these things that it's not really about um
So really
because of
quick,
that
can
lack of
I
understanding.
just
Yeah.
clarify DEI? Can you give a quick summary of DEI for anyone listening that might not know?
Yeah, diversity, equity, and inclusion programs that includes things like affirmative action, and then they've also got departments on college campuses where they'll do like belonging programs, for example, for students of color, students from different backgrounds, and then focusing on things as well as like microaggressions and how to avoid that. And I mean, that stuff gets made fun of a lot online, and there's a big group of people as well who will defend that down to the last point. And I think the the root of a lot of that is simply because on both sides, the opposition and the support, there's a lack of understanding of what it actually is. So when we're having conversations, it's not like a lot of these conversations should be more like, hey, we don't want people to be assholes to each other. Like that's why we need something like DEI in place because that's happening a lot, and people don't understand how this could actually really um piss somebody off, at the most basic level. And
Yeah.
that's something where if we want to live in a society that's productive and happy, we should explain to people how things are being construed. But instead, it becomes a thing where people are like, oh no, they're trying to make things unfair on the opposing side or on the supporting side. It's like we are people don't understand it, but they know that that's what the woke people are supporting, so that's what they're going to support as well. And I don't want to put too much emphasis on that in terms of like overall views, but it's just something I've noticed where like we do have that culture online where it's not as much about critical thinking, it's just about following with a
Mhm.
tribe. And I thought that was a recent example where you can see that happening. There's a lot of other examples, and a lot of them are very politically touchy as well.
Right.
But yeah, I guess does that point make sense?
Yeah, no, definitely. It actually brings me into another question I wanted to ask, which was how do you think that these, you know, algorithms, like what you're kind of describing with this tribe culture online, less critical thinking, more following, what your tribe is doing. Someone might be feeling pressure to agree or not agree because if they, take the stance that the other tribe is taking, they'll be excluded from their tribe, but if they do that, then they're with the other tribe. So it's like you're not allowed to do critical thinking because you have to either be with your team or not. And so how do you see algorithms, echo chambers, this tribe mentality online changing and affecting the current state of our democracy?
Yeah. Um, I mean it's a risk because like I was mentioning with like those examples, people are I mean we can't say that people have, previously been super informed about the issues and now that's different. Like there have always been problems with, people having an information gap. But I think the problem maybe is that people are really, really angry about things that don't always make sense. Like it's a lot easier to get into an echo chamber where you're like, oh, all Republicans are evil or all Democrats are stupid or whatever it is, and they're trying to
Mhm.
destroy the country. And our only way through is to vote for this party. And I'm telling you, like, you can have extreme party views. I'm all for that. But that type of rhetoric literally just exists to get you to vote for those parties. And there's a staffer sitting in a room creating that rhetoric right now saying this will get more people to vote for our party, even as if it's at the expense of things actually getting done. And just from working in this position in the Young People's Alliance, where I work with a lot of young people who lean a lot more liberal. And then I'm also working with conservative young people as well. And then, the North Carolina state legislature, which is overwhelmingly conservative. Um, I get to interact with a lot of viewpoints. And I genuinely think on most issues, everybody wants the same thing. Republicans will call it economic opportunity. Democrats will call it economic justice. But we all want economic mobility for the
Yeah.
most part. We both want that, as part of our system. And on a lot of these issues, I think that is the problem is we've just let rhetoric overtake actual policy. And social media has just made that way, way worse than it used to be.
Well, I mean, I agree. And in this specific situation, this is the Reconnect podcast. So on the topic of connectedness and communication as humans, how do you think that how do you think specifically the switch from mostly all in-person discourse over to the rise of mostly social media discourse and just internet discourse in general, how do you think that has affected, the political system and movement in America and its communities?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I mean, we've seen that with I think anybody knows like if you've been in a confrontation online, like at least for me, I tend to be mad about that for a lot longer than I would with an in-person confrontation. Because in-person confrontation, you're arguing with someone, they're arguing back at you, whatever happens, happens, it's done, it's resolved. With an online confrontation, you text something mean to somebody, an hour later, they text you something mean back. and then you think of a response for a couple minutes, and then you text something back, and then it just goes on, and it never really ends. And even worse, like with an argument, at some point, people step up on each other, and
Yep.
people, like you can see the other person, and it's two things. It's one, hopefully there's a little bit of empathy there, seeing the other person's face as you're saying these mean things to them, and two,
Yeah.
like they might actually hit you if you
Yeah.
say something that's too bad. Um, but online, there's none of that. It's literally just, these mean words being said about you in public that you need to like refute and you need to take down without any threat of physical violence that feels real in the moment, because there's not somebody there in front of you, and without any empathy for the other person and any understanding of how they might be getting hurt, because it's just words on a screen. You don't see somebody's face.
Right. If you blow that up, that interaction, that of the person, taking an hour to respond to something mean, and then it's just this never-ending mean back and forth online. If you blow that up to the whole country, and that's how most people are interacting, like how do you think that that is affecting our ability to, make positive change in this country?
Yeah, that's a really good way of thinking about it in terms of blowing it up. Like that's the problem, right? If everyone is constantly angry at each other, and when they think of Democrats, if you're a Republican, they don't think of their neighbor, but they think of either what they're being shown on Republican social media posts, or that fire war they had in the comment section with the Democrat. They are going to be much less, they're going to think that those people don't have the country's best interests in mind, and they're going to be much less willing to actually see other sides. So that's absolutely a big part of the problem. And it's hard too, because that's not something that we're talking about with the Kids Online Safety Act. Like fire wars will still be happening in the comments, and I think we need a more holistic approach and more just emphasis on in-person communities. Like the work that you're doing, I think is fantastic. Because social media is going to be a part of our political discourse, but we need those in-person touch points to make people understand that there's values and a persona behind different ideologies that go beyond words on the screen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, finding some way to find humanity in someone that is just a text box and a picture on a screen is so difficult, because I love the example you gave of your neighbor, because even me growing up, I had, my mom was all into the Obama like change 2008, like it was all this thing, and I remember walking around with her like passing out flyers and stuff, and I hated at the time, walking around all this stuff, but I felt like I'd put this work into something, and I didn't understand anything. But I was just like, all right, this is what my parents believe. This must be the right thing, like a totally like a kid just taking on whatever your parents agree with. And then my neighbor had I remember I saw he had like I think it was McCain that was going against Obama one
Mhm.
year, or whoever the other person was, and he had that sign in his yard, and I was like, Mom, Mr. Ed, like he's bad, like he's a bad guy, like he doesn't agree with, he's going for the wrong guy. And she gave me this whole like it was easy to for her to tell me, because I used to go over to his garage and we would like do woodworking projects together, and we would like I totally knew this guy, and we
Yeah.
had a great time together. And she was like, Mr. Ed's a person just like you and me, and like the country sometimes needs these beliefs and these directions, and sometimes the country needs these beliefs and these directions, and everybody's entitled to their own voice, and that's what makes this country work. And it was such an easier way to learn that lesson with someone that I knew and had great experiences with, and who I saw every day, and I love that comparison of the neighbor versus the hateful person online that you could just see, you think is just going to destroy the country.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that example too. That's a great story. And I think your mom should run for president.
I do too. I think she would be a great president. I'd vote for her.
Me too. She's got my vote.
Well, Sam, thank you so much for your time. I know it's valuable. So, anyone listening, please visit the Young People's Alliance website, where you can donate to the organization and learn how you can get involved. And that's youngpeoplesalliance.org. So the link will also be in the description. Sam, anything else you'd like to share before we conclude this episode?
I think that's it, but thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate you coming on. All right, bye, Sam.
Bye, Sean.